Did you know that if you've had cancer in the UK, you are legally disabled for life under the Equality Act? That means that when you return to work, your employer, by law, has to make reasonable adjustments to allow you to do your job. They cannot sack you, they cannot dismiss you. It's illegal. I'm Dr. Liz O'Riordan. I'm a consultant breast surgeon who's had breast cancer twice. Thanks for watching my channel. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss next week's video. In today's live interview, I'm chatting to Barbara Wilson. She's the founder of the social enterprise workingwithcancer.co.uk, who are instrumental in helping me get back to work. They offer coaching for employees and employers to help make sure that your legal rights are covered. In this, we discuss what a reasonable adjustment is, what you can ask for, what you can expect. If you've got any other questions after watching the live, let me know in the comments and I can get Barbara back to do another chat. Me. Come on, phone. God, I hate technology. There we go. Right. We can see you now. So the first question I want to ask is it true that if you've had cancer, you are legally disabled?
Yeah, you are legally disabled, and you're actually considered legally disabled from the point of diagnosis throughout your treatment and for the rest of your life, however well you are. So you are.
I could be running an Ironman, I could be climbing, could be working, but I'm still legally disabled.
Exactly. So, you know, I could live to 150 years old and be as fit as a fiddle. I would still be classed under the legislation, assuming they don't change it, I would still be classed as legally disabled, yeah.
And that doesn't mean that you are entitled to the things that a disabled person would have. For example, blue parking, all that kind of stuff. It's just in law, isn't it? You have to be assessed for those kind of the blue badges and things.
Exactly, yeah. There are actually some councils that do allow blue badges for people who are, for example, going through chemo and are not particularly mobile, and some people obviously with advanced illness who have continuing mobility problems. But in general, the issue of
Oh, I think you've frozen, Barbara. Can anyone else see Barbara? I've got her frozen on my screen. Sorry about this. Oh, she's gone. She'll come back. Sorry, she must be having bad internet connections. We'll get her back. I know that you are legally disabled in the UK. It's not necessarily the same in other countries, so it's worth doing some research and seeing if you are legally disabled, whether you live in America or Canada or Europe, but you may have rights here as well. Let's hope we can get Barbara back. Sorry about this. What being legally disabled means is that, oh, here we go, she's going to come back. Come on, Barbara. Hello again. Don't worry. So we know that if you've had cancer, you are legally disabled, and
yes,
that gives you rights when it comes to returning to work. One of those rights is that your employer has to make reasonable adjustments to allow you to return.
That's right.
And that's a really interesting phase, because do they know they need to do it? How far do they need to go? Can you talk to us a little bit about it and what we should be able to expect?
Yeah, the term reasonable is a term that's used under English common law, so it's a bit specific to the UK. But what it means is that you are entitled to ask for adjustments in your hours, in your what you do, in the location where you work, in general in your working day. That will help you return to work or manage your work. And the word reasonable means they can't be totally daft. So, for example, if you were to say, I'd like to work between 11 and 11:30 on a Monday, and on a Wednesday between 1 and 1:30, and then that's it. That's clearly not particularly reasonable. So it has to be something that is vaguely sensible. But the big issue is that employers have to take this really seriously. They can't just say, well, the business can't deal with this, and they have to give it proper consideration. And in general, they have to do everything they can to accommodate those adjustments. And those adjustments can last not just for a few weeks, they can last for a year or more on a temporary basis. And if need be, they should look at making a permanent adjustment. If, for example, you felt that the job, that, it was discovered that the job was just too onerous, then they should look to make a permanent adjustment for you, either a different role or different hours or whatever. So it's a really, really important right that people have. And you shouldn't feel guilty or somehow that you're not trying hard enough if you're asking for reasonable adjustments. You're entitled to them.
So someone's asked, is reducing my hours from 7 till 4 to 9 to 3 reasonable? And I would say yes.
Totally reasonable.
And for me, there was no way I could work full time. I couldn't concentrate. I had to work part-time to start with, and they had to make that reasonable adjustment. And sometimes there can be problems where if the company needs a full-time employee and they can't meet business demands with a half-time employee, can they then sack you, or do they have to find someone else to fill in the job you're not doing?
Well, first of all, they'd have to show really, to really prove they cannot do that job on a shared basis or a part-time basis. In this day and age, with technology and all the other things that are available, then I think most employers would be pretty hard pressed to show that a job can't be managed in a different way. If for some reason you couldn't be accommodated, they're required to offer you an alternative role at the same grade and the same rate of pay. In other words, no detriment to your status or rate of pay. And they're required to do their damnedest to find that. And if not, then they clearly need to come some accommodation with you. But frankly, it can't just be a question of, you ask. I mean, I remember asking my employer, saying I want to work 4 days a week rather than 5, and just being told immediately, no, that's not possible. That would have been absolute discrimination. It wasn't even given a moment's thought. It was an immediate reaction. And frankly, looking at the job as I was doing then, it would have been totally possible to do that. So I think employers need to really understand they have to give this very, very serious thought, because the reputational damage they could do themselves is immense if they get this wrong.
They have to be able to prove that they cannot cope if you reduce your hours, you reduce your working pattern. They can't just say, no, we can't be bothered to fix it. So let's say I go back to work part-time after finishing treatment. Do I get paid that part-time salary, or do they have to pay me my full-time salary? Do you know?
They only required to pay you for your part-time salary. That's the difficult bit. And there are some employers who are quite generous and keep people. And we've been working with several people recently, at least I have, who've been on full pay throughout. Unfortunately, it tends to be, I guess, the professional services companies who do that rather than, let's say, retail environments. So they're only required to pay you for the hours you do. But I would always, if that's happening, at least get some advice from Citizens Advice or Macmillan or Maggie's to see if there are any other benefits I can claim to make up my salary. But fundamentally, they're only required to pay you for the hours you work.
Which makes sense. You don't want to take the piss. And again, it's hard realising I can't do a full-time job. That does mean a pay cut, but at least I still have a job. A few people have been saying, I do 12-hour shifts. I want to drop it to 6. And I was told no. She said, my unit only does 12-hour shifts. My employer asked, we don't do that. What do you say as a patient when you're being told that by your boss?
It's very, very difficult, because part of the issue here is having the energy and, as it were, the strength, both physical and emotional, to push back. And then the one thing I would say is that, an organisation like ours, which coaches people, we can help people with both the words and what you can do to overcome that resistance for employers. Typically, most employers are just I'm afraid to say, ignorant of the law.
And lazy, yeah.
And you know, it's only a question of sometimes just asserting your rights, showing people in writing what you're entitled to, and understanding the consequences of a bad employment practice that will change minds. But it is, you know, sometimes people are just too exhausted to kind of push back.
Yeah.
And all I'd say is, you know, if you can't do it, you can't. But do come to an organisation like ours, because we also do give free advice.
Yeah. So working with cancer, they're fantastic. They help me because I couldn't do a 4-week phase return to my job, treating women with breast cancer having had it. And I was being fobbed off. And it was only when I said, right, I've been to ACAS, I know my rights. I know I am now legally disabled and you have to help me. It's like, oh, okay, let's get HR involved and let's bend over backwards. But I was this close to saying, sod it, I don't have the energy.
Yeah.
So let's say some people work through treatment, but when it finishes, the mental hit, the fatigue hits, and they realize I have to cut my hours. That's really hard when, well, you work through chemo, why can't you work now? Does those reasonable adjustments, can they change as our physical and mental circumstances change?
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, and the thing to realize is this isn't some kind of a, it's not like you're a bad person if you've worked your way up to kind of do a certain number of hours and then have to kind of change them. It's just that we're all human and we all have different reactions to our treatment. Frankly, it's quite typical for people to return to work, you know, pretty successfully on a sort of gradual phased return and build up their hours to almost full time after, let's say, 3 months. And then they hit a bit of a brick wall, often emotionally, because what's happened is that it's only after people have managed to sort of get the external physical healing done that suddenly the emotional impact of what people have gone through, you know, it just hits you.
And we look well.
Yeah.
So Barbara and I have both had cancer. We could be sitting here with metastatic cancer and you wouldn't know. And because we look well, people think we can do our job full time, and it's not necessarily so. And that can be really hard, can't it?
Very hard. And of course, the problem is we try to look well, you know, which if you look at Deborah James, you know, she's got a terrific tan. She looks beautiful, you know.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, cancer is one of those illnesses where you can cover up the scars, you can put on the makeup and the wig, you can put on a big smile, you can be, you know, you can act being the most confident person in the world.
And especially if no one else knows, because we don't all tell people. I'll come on to that. But some questions that have come through. Is there legal protection if you are made redundant?
Well, the answer is if it's a genuine redundancy, it's a genuine redundancy. So, for example, you know, if your job disappears, then an employer can say, well, I'm sorry, the job no longer exists. We're going to have to make you redundant. And I'm afraid that can still happen. The tricky thing is that, you know, I can tell you at least several dozen times we've been working with people where they've gone back to work and the employer has said, it's lovely to see you back, but in your absence, the job has changed. And we've put somebody into it who is more junior, but we didn't need such a senior job anymore. Now, the problem is that, you know, very often an employer is acting in a way that's frankly unprofessional, you know, I would say bloody diabolical.
I would say that too.
And they can get away with it. But, you know, unfortunately,
I think it's really hard when you're being beaten down to have the energy to fight and to say, this is wrong, you can't do that. Who are they going to believe? Whilst you just wait for Barbara to come back. You are legally disabled for life. If you had cancer as a child, you are legally disabled for life. And as your cancer treatments may go on and on, it may come back in the future, you are still legally disabled and you are still entitled to ask for adjustments to your work as things change. Let's get Barbara back. Wait for her. We're going to talk about phased return and holidays when she comes back, because sometimes employers will ask you to do that, and that can be a really hard issue to tackle. Just wait for Barbara to come back. She works for a company called Working with Cancer, And they really, really helped me because although I blogged about my treatment, I assumed everybody knew, but not everybody did. And they didn't know what to say to me. I looked very different. I didn't know what to talk to them about. And it was Barbara helped me answer the questions. What do you do when people say, where have you been? What's wrong with you? Do you want to talk about all the while? Hello again.
Unfortunately, I don't know. My phone keeps kicking me off, Liz.
Don't worry.
There must be some gremlin in the
don't worry
today.
We've had lots of questions about, can you be forced to use your holiday for a phased return?
No. That's the answer.
Because a lot of us are.
I know.
And I was suggested, because I accrued annual leave during my treatment, and that was paid at full pay. So I finished all my sick leave, so my income had stopped. And said, if you use your holiday, then that's full pay, and you can use that as part of your annual, as your phased return, which will extend it to 8 weeks instead of 4. Can they do that?
Well, they can say it, but frankly, your phased return should be as long as your phased return is, and you shouldn't be required to take holiday to. You might want to use some of your, if you're doing a phased return and you're not on full pay, you might decide that you want to boost your income by using some of your holiday leave to boost your income, but they should not be requiring you to take your holiday. And there are also some employers who actually insist that you can't have holiday if you're on sick leave. That is also rubbish.
Wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've had at least 2 cases where people I've been working with have been told, how dare they have holiday if they're off sick? How could they possibly cope with travel and going through a busy airport if they're off sick? Well, you know, there's a difference between holiday and working. So no, you know, the whole kind of, you should take holiday, you know, a phased return should be as long as it takes.
Yeah, and I think I was very lucky to have an incredible occupational health consultant, but many don't get it. Some saying they suggested 4 weeks, you're mentioning 3 months. I think if you had a small amount of treatment, and I say small in length of time, for example, a lumpectomy and radiotherapy, then a 1 month phase return may be enough. But if you've had chemo, if you've had a good 6-10 months of treatment, you're gonna need longer.
Yeah.
Because you haven't thought of anything sensible. You're going to be knackered after half a day. You can't think. It's having that responsibility. And I think you say, I would rather have a longer phased return and shorten it. So then the trust, your employers can realize we're going to need to cover you for a little bit longer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're absolutely right in what you're saying, that, you know, if you have a relatively early stage cancer with relatively, you know, maybe a bit of surgery, maybe a bit of radio, that's potentially a very different phased return from someone I was working with yesterday who's had a double mastectomy, had cardiac failure during her surgery, then had major issues with her reconstruction, then had more problems with her reconstruction and was off work for 2 years. You cannot expect somebody to come back to work after 2 years in a matter of a few weeks. It's going to take them at least a year, and sometimes longer, you know. I think it's...
So the problem is, a lot of us are now posting on social media about our lives, and our colleagues and our friends can see that. And when you're off gladding about at the Chelsea Flower Show, why can't you come into work? And it's really hard. And again, when you're off on sick leave, you are recovering from cancer treatment. If you broke your leg, no one would give a toots that you were going off on holiday, but it's like, oh my God, she's enjoying herself. Your sick leave does not mean sitting at home for 6 months doing nothing. Absolutely. It is recovering, and it is life outside of working hours. So please don't feel guilty about enjoying yourself whilst you're not working and you still got income coming in, because it's really hard, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think part of the issues we mentioned earlier is that people can often look really well, and sometimes it leads to resentment if you're not working the full hours.
Yes.
The team, if they don't fully understand your circumstances, can suddenly think, oh well, maybe he or she's milking it, you know. Yeah. And I think that's why it's really important to kind of keep lines of communication open, you know, so that people understand that you may look fine, but actually, you know, it's not
Yeah.
It's not plain sailing. And I think we all try and pretend that everything's fine. People ask us how we are and we say, I'm fine. And I think sometimes it's easier just to give people a number out of 10.
Yeah.
So you can, rather than, and because you may not want to go into kind of, oh my God, I don't feel well, blah, 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 blah. If you could just say, look, today's a 5 out of 10 day.
Yeah.
Let's leave it at that. You can imagine.
I have a question. Let's say you don't want anyone to know you've had cancer. You don't want anyone to know because they might tell their mum, who might tell your kids and find out. So you're keeping it secret. Legally, I presume you have to tell one of your employers or managers so they can give you the reasonable adjustment.
You don't have to, yeah, legally, although interestingly, Liz, if you didn't tell your employer, but because of your situation, it could be proved they should have known, then you could still potentially claim discrimination. So, you know, an employer can't say, well, you know, she's having all this time off, but I didn't know why. Well, you know, a court could criticize a company and fine them because they're saying, well, if an employee is having a lot of time off, you should have found out why. Yeah. You have a duty of care. So ignorance or not saying something is not an excuse. Okay. But just going back to it, you're not required to tell anybody. You don't have to tell anyone about cancer.
Let's say your line manager knows, but you don't want anyone else to know. Any tips for us dealing with the questions, the why have you been off? What are you doing? Why aren't you pulling your weight? It's really hard. Well, I can imagine it's really hard when you're trying to keep it secret and don't want people to think like that for you.
Yeah. Or, I mean, it depends how much you want to say. You could say, look, I've been ill and I don't want to say anymore. And you could just leave it at that.
Yeah.
I think not to say anything at all is actually not terribly helpful for anybody.
Because we're nosy and curious and we just keep prodding. Go on, tell me.
Yeah, and you have to just say, I'm really sorry. You just have to accept it as is. I've been ill, I'm recovering, that's all I'm going to tell you. Why don't we go and have a drink? You know, change the subject. Yeah. You know, you can make a joke of it, you know. Mm-hmm. But, you know, I think sometimes you have to assertively but nicely say to people, butt out, you know. And unfortunately, sometimes people will unfortunately jump to the wrong conclusions. That often happens when people have a terminal illness. So that you have to be slightly careful, because as soon as if you've got, you know, what I call treatable but incurable cancer, the problem we then have is that if you're not careful, people will write you off. You know, expect you to, you know, be gone in the next month or two. So I think it's important. You could say to people, you know, my cancer is not curable, but it's treatable, and I intend to be around for the next 10 years or whatever. But I think, you know, that's one of the issues we have with employers at the moment, is as soon as somebody has a metastatic diagnosis, the employers start thinking, you better write the obituary.
You're on your deathbed. No.
And so they still have a duty of care.
They do. Quite a few questions about working from home. So say you are working from home. It's very hard to get a phase return. You know, you're not in the office. Surely you can just sit and do it on a laptop. How do you stand up for yourself and say, I can't do the hours from working from home? It is still different.
You absolutely, it's still different. You have to still talk, you know, ask for reasonable adjustments. You still have to set boundaries, because Zoom calls, working from home, you may not be commuting, but it's still exhausting. You know, it's exhausting for someone who's vaguely fit, let alone for someone who's just recovering from cancer treatment. So you need to still talk about doing, you know, your few hours in the morning and that's it. And you need to set boundaries. Arguably, it's more difficult because, you know, people again see you on Zoom and you look okay. You can't have that same quality of conversation with a team member or with a manager about how you really are. But it's just as important to have your adjustments if you're at home as if you're in a workplace.
And I would say be really strict about not looking at work emails. I mean, I'm guilty. It's 10 o'clock at night and Microsoft tells me, you know, why are you still doing emails? You need to stick to those guidelines. You don't look at work stuff outside. You almost put your laptop away and
absolutely.
Stick to those boundaries, because it is mentally draining thinking about something important. You may
exactly.
have no physical side effects, but and going through all of that, it's really, really hard.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue it's actually more draining, Liz, because when you're isolated at home, you can imagine all kinds of things happening at work without you. And you actually begin to kind of get slightly paranoid about being copied into emails, and why didn't I know about that? So actually, you know, I think it's much tougher working at home if you're recovering or being treated for cancer, but still important to keep to those boundaries, as you've said.
I guess actually asking to work from home is a reasonable adjustment you could ask for, isn't it?
Absolutely it is. As I say, location, it could be home, it could be a different office if there's a different one that's nearer to you. But absolutely, it's all part of being a reasonable adjustment.
If most of your work can be done from a laptop, there is no reason why you need to be in the hospital, especially after the last 2 years. And that is a very fair, reasonable adjustment you could ask for. You don't need to say, oh, it's cancer and infection risk. They don't need any of that. They just need to know you're legally disabled. They have to prove that you can't do it before they can say no.
Exactly.
So let's say you've got useless HR, useless occupational health. They're still saying no, sorry, you've got to come in. Who do we go to next to help? Do we go to places like ACAS? When you say, right, I'm gonna sue you, you want to do something, or your husband or partner has the energy to do something because you are being discriminated against. Where do we go next?
You could go to Citizens Advice. I think ACAS too. I'm not quite sure how much they deal with individuals, but yeah, ACAS, Citizens Advice, or come to us, and we can get people with some pro bono legal support, or Macmillan, who provide advice too. But I think don't just put up with it. You know, I think if we have rights as a citizen of this country, it's important to exercise those rights. And, you know, people have fought for those rights. And so it's important to continue to fight for them so that they're taken up and used, and employees can understand that they have a duty of care. So, you know, I know it's tough, but don't become a victim. None of us are victims.
So someone said, I'm a primary school teacher, worried about being in charge in the classroom and the workload. Any advice for reasonable adjustments for teachers? Because that's hard when you've got the classes to keep up, isn't it?
Well, you know, interestingly, I was just talking to a teacher yesterday, a primary school teacher who has been off for, I think, the best part of a year, and is having a meeting, I think, today to discuss her return to work. I think in her particular case, or any particular case, you still start with doing a couple of mornings a week, or a morning a week if you can do that, and you build your time up. And the school has to find a way of covering your work. It may be you can do some work from home, but, you know, to say that, you know, cover can always be arranged. Where there's a will, there's a way.
So if you broke your leg, if you got meningitis, if you were pregnant on maternity leave, you just go off. And it may be worth saying, can you carry on paying for my locum whilst I do my phased return? So they can fill me in once I come back. There are ways around it, but they have to do it, don't they?
Yeah, they have to. And I think, you know,
oh, Barbara's going to freeze again. I think it's really important not to take too much on because you feel guilty, you feel you're letting your colleagues down. I know what it's like, but you will exhaust yourself. And it's much easier if you can to start with a couple of mornings a week and then build up to a day, and then a day off, a day at work, then go full in and get sick and have to take more time off again. I know so many people who've done that, and it's really, really hard. You have to give yourself a break. Hopefully Barbara's going to come back again for the final questions. But if you have any other questions that you want to ask us, please let us know. And if this has been useful, we can do another one, because it's such an important topic. Come on, Barbara. It's much harder if you are self-employed or freelance, because you don't have those rights. And we can do another live for people who do work for themselves, just to help you learn what your rights are, how you can help yourself, because that is, hold on, view request. There we go. Let's let her in. Come on, Barbara. There we go.
I think there's some gremlin that doesn't want us to talk to each other, Liz.
Don't worry, we'll start wrapping up soon.
Yeah.
So I was wondering whether often just a well-crafted email that you can send to your manager saying, I don't know, is that something that we could do? We could put together, you could have on the website to say, right, this is a nice email saying, these are my rights. I know you have to do this, by the way. You know, that passive aggressive kind of to really bad employers.
Yeah. I mean, I think to do a general email is always dangerous. So my view is we're always happy to help. We do help people craft emails because every situation is different.
Yeah.
So we you know, and every relationship with a manager is different. So absolutely we can, and typically what I'd say is that you have a conversation and then send an email, or you send an email and then you have the conversation. But you know, there are easy ways of doing this. What you shouldn't do is, as it were, you know, silence and hope have silence and hope that your boss understands intuitively what is the right thing to do, because I don't think I have ever come across that.
No. And never write an email in anger. I learned the hard way not to write emails at 5 o'clock on a Friday night. If you're angry, write it and then send it to yourself and read it a couple of days later when you can calm down. So some people have talked about, can you be forced to medically retire from a job?
It depends on the organization, and I'm not medical retirement is very complicated.
Yes.
So what I would always say is get legal advice, basically.
There are so many layers and tiers, and I had to retire for lots of reasons, but my trust needed a full-time consultant. They did not need a part-time consultant, and they didn't need 1.5 part-time consultants. And that was a problem with your job as a service provider. But we can do one about medical retirement with someone else. Any tips just to help people start that conversation with the employers? Are we meant to know what reasonable adjustments to ask for? Is it better if we can say what we'd want and they can then say no? Or whose ball should the court be in?
I think it's helpful to have an idea of what would work for you. It's quite difficult. I mean, I remember I'm thinking that an analogy is information technology. When I was working in corporate life, the IT department would say, "What do you need?" And I'd say, "I have no idea what I need." So I think sometimes it's worth working, you know, taking your time to work out what would work for you. Get some advice if you can from others you know who've had cancer, or again from working with cancer, or from any other groups that have been through, you know, groups of people with cancer who've been through this before. But I think it's always good to go with a plan of what you think will work for you.
Like, come to me with a solution, not a problem.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I would say, if you're going back part-time, maybe do a morning, a day off, a morning, and then a full day, a day off. Don't do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, have Thursday, Friday off. It's too much.
Yeah.
You may think you want a long weekend. So when should you start the conversation? I'm still undergoing treatment and won't finish until October.
Okay, I would say you'd start the conversation 4 to 6 weeks before you're due to go back, and say, you know, you're planning on coming back to work, let's say in 4 weeks' time. You'd like to discuss your, you know, your phased return and the kind of adjustments you'd like to put in place to support you.
Yeah.
And, you know, they're not just about hours of working as well, because it may be, for example, if you've had bowel surgery or bladder surgery, you need, for example, to have a desk near a loo. You need somewhere to change your colostomy bag, for example.
And so if you're on a supermarket checkout doing a 4-hour job, you need to go and change it. What I would say is, often it can take a year to recover from chemotherapy. And I would say when you've had a long course treatment, you want at least another 3 months if you're not working, and you can afford to be on sick leave just to let yourself recover. So give them an idea of how long they need to cover for you. And the date to go back may change because you don't know how you're going to feel. So say at the moment, but it all depends on how things are.
Yeah, exactly. I think the issue is about flexibility, because not only do you not know, frankly, the doctors often don't know
No,
how you're going to be.
different.
Exactly.
Someone's asked, I've worked all the way through chemo, radiotherapy, surgery, but I now need time off. Can I do that? Say you've used up all your sick, you worked all the way through, can you do it?
Yes, absolutely you can.
And is that a sick leave or part of a phased return to drop the hours again?
I'd go back to a phased return. If you're still, it depends. If you're really ill, and you know, either emotionally unwell, you know, psychologically unwell, or physically you've got some impairment, then you may need to have sick leave. But if you're just feeling exhausted, tired, you know, I can't do these hours, you know, any longer, I can't work full time any longer, then ask for, you know, go back and ask for reasonable adjustments. And that could be, you know, you could well go back to doing 1 or 2, you know, saying you need to go back doing 1 or 2 days or 1 or 2 mornings a week. You can ask for reasonable adjustments at any time. So you could have worked your way gradually back to full-time working, be back at work full-time for a month, and then I can't do this any longer, and you have to then adjust back again.
And hope that's fantastic. And one thing I would say, the working with cancer were fantastic for me at helping me work out how to talk to colleagues and how to do, because all I'd thought about was, how am I going to be a surgeon? How am I going to do my job? Will my hands work? And Barbara said, but what about when people ask you, where have you been? Are you all right? Do you want to talk about cancer? Where's your hair gone? I hadn't even thought about what to say to friends and colleagues. And I think it's really useful saying, when everyone asks you, you need a set answer, because you'll get stressed and say too much. And whether it's you saying, I've been sick, or I sent a round Robin email to everyone on the team saying, as most of you know, I've been off with breast cancer. When I'm at work, I just want to be Liz. And I don't want to talk about it. I'm just Liz, treat me as normal.
Yeah.
So if you stop me in the corridor, I don't want you to say, hi, how are you? Because I'm working. You may be different, but I've never thought about those kind of things, and it's so important, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, every situation is different. You know, we're talking earlier about school. Well, then you've also got to think not just about what you say to colleagues, but what you say to the children.
Yeah.
What you say to parents, what you say to the governors. You know, so there are a variety of different communities you need to communicate with in a way that works for you. Not to say anything really doesn't help. So there's a lot of planning and thinking. We know we try not to make it hard work, but you know, some proper preparation and planning makes life so much easier, as you discovered. And
often it can mean a whole new wardrobe. Hiding your bra, the hot flushes, the layers, the little fan that keeps coming out of the... Why do you keep doing that? You're 40. Yeah, there's a lot to think about how you're going to cope. And if you can start doing that beforehand, it will really, really help.
Yeah. And so I said, you know, like, do your planning a few weeks in advance. Don't wait until the day before you're due to go back. So I said, give it, you know, at least 4 weeks, maybe 6 if you can. Yeah.
Practice walking in heels if you need to wear them. I still can't walk in them. I lived in them.
Yeah. Like, practice your journey. Practice your journey to work.
Yes.
You know, do your clothes still fit you?
Yeah. All that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I was totally unprepared for the fact that when I went to say hello to my boss's secretary when I went back to work, and I was literally about a foot away from her. I said, hello, Jen. She said, I recognize the voice, but who are you?
I had that.
And it was awful. I mean, I thought, how can you not but of course, you know, and my boss actually walked straight past me, didn't recognize me at all. So you have to, you can't just assume that it's all going to be you have to do lots of planning.
You do, you really do. But before we go, I think people want us to do more because there's so many questions. Just tell us a little bit about working with cancer, what you do and where we can find you.
That's great. Thank you, Liz. So, and I'm hoping I don't get cut off again. Bear with me. You tell them if I disappear.
I will.
So we're a small social enterprise set up in 2014, and we provide coaching support to anyone who's affected by cancer. That's somebody with cancer or carers or friends or family, to help you kind of cope with the kind of physical and the emotional impact of cancer and manage work at the same time. We do talk about life and other stuff as well, but work is the main focus. And we provide one-to-one coaching for individuals. And if they're employer sponsors, we provide advice and guidance to the line manager at the same time. That's ideal. And we also provide workshops for patients, and we provide workshops for companies, and we provide consultancy support. And to contact us, if you go to our website, which is www.workingwithcancer.co.uk, there you can find us and get in touch with us.
They're just a brilliant resource. And again, if you employ people and you don't know about your rights as an employer, Barbara can come in and make sure that you know what you're doing. So thank you everyone for watching us today. Barbara, I'm sure we'll be doing this again, and enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Hi again. Thanks for watching this live interview. I found it really, really helpful. Let me know if you've got any other comments and I'll get Barbara back to do an interview for you. Make sure you click subscribe so you don't miss next week's video, and I will see you next time.